Ray Tarada introduces the concept of metaracial in her 2023 book, Metaracial: Hegel, Anti-Blackness, and Political Identity. This work represents a sustained exploration of Hegel's enduring impact on our understanding of race, and, more precisely, how race shapes our cognitive frameworks. Tarada's insights align closely with Denise Ferreira da Silva's work, especially her book, Toward a Global Idea of Race, 2007. Positioned within the realm of critical race studies and Black studies, Metaracial contributes significantly by elucidating the racial trajectories that constrain radical imagination, and the potentially violent nature of collectivity when confronted with anti-blackness. The metaracial concept places the racial, rather than racism, as its primary focus. However, Tarada acknowledges the challenge of maintaining a clear distinction between the two terms. 2023, 4. Both racial and racism position race as external to a subject encompassed by a fully modern political grammar, as observed in both liberal and radical thinking. By investigating whether boundaries between racialism, any positive use of race, and racism blur, Tarada identifies instances of metaracial logic. This lack of distinction forms the basis of her central claim that political identity harbors an irreconcilable overlap between anti-racism and anti-blackness, in and through its preparation for collectivity. 20. This overlap does not merely reflect the social and political goals of these respective movements, but highlights, similar to Afropessimism, which focuses on the ongoing conditions structured by anti-blackness. Metaracial draws attention to blackness as a challenging aspect for thought, necessitating a reorientation of existing critical strategies for addressing racial subjugation. There are two closely intertwined formulations of metaracial logic in liberal and radical Enlightenment thinking, as explored by Ray Tarada in her 2023 book, Metaracial: Hegel, Anti-Blackness, and Political Identity. The first formulation involves anti-racists no longer attributing a racial trait, but substituting racialism for a racial trait. This results in a feedback loop where racial subjugation is explained in connection with racialism. Radicals enact the substitution of a racialist stance for identity and transpose racial hierarchy. The metaracial logic demands that anti-racism addresses racism as someone's inadequately historico-political grasp, rather than a question of political identity, informing subject positions. The relational and open nature of the political holds the promise of delimiting race and racism's ideological potential for violence, rendering the racial non-political and irrelevant. This demand is not strictly post-racial, but positions race outside political identity without necessitating a biological account. Hegel plays a central role in this context as negativity, or freedom attained through self-negation, paves the way for open relation. Tarada notes a cross-pollination between contemporary anti-identitarian politics and Hegel's racism for radicals. Relational theories of reality, while not explicitly racialist, capture what is at stake in coexistence and relation, encompassing access, communicability, and reciprocity. Political inclusivity, based on the participation of a politically exemplary slave, illustrates relationality's potential for violence, as it splits off another non-political slave condemned to primitivism. Metaracial does not merely broaden the descriptive capture of race, but explains the necessity of shifting vocabulary from racism to anti-blackness. While racism is conceptually constrained by the negativity of radicals, anti-blackness allows questioning how and why slavery persists, and continues to structure the negative moment of emancipation. Metaracial expands the methodology of studying race beyond preconceived notions, encouraging attention to instances that challenge established definitions of race and racism. In this context, Metaracial aptly describes anti-racism's self-referential capacity to host a formation around anti-blackness that cannot be discussed if defined out of existence. Attempts to make blackness commensurable with a relational political imaginary, whether part of a multicultural coalition or a non-racial collective, are seen as debilitating critical engagement with slavery and creating artificial distinctions between good and bad actors. Terada emphasizes that the borders of slavery call the grounds of homo politicus into play, shifting the focus from incorporating post-slavery subjects into the realm of political identity to understanding the implications of slavery. Unmitigated relation, influenced by Hegel's idea of history, renders any other principle and practice impossible, including future ones, according to Terada. These limitations are both conceptual and imaginary for liberal and radical abolitionists.